Welcome everyone, and this is almost hard to believe I'm saying this, but it is May 2025. So welcome everyone to the May 2025 edition of Trust Masters Monthly. As you'll see, today we're joined by a very special guest, Emily Schuckman, the Director of ISO Services at A-LIGN. Emily, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. I'm excited to be here.
So excited to have you here. So excited to have you here, Em. But we've got a little bit of a full agenda. So for those that can see me looking down, just really quickly, I want to be sure that I state kind of our objectives so that as we come back them through the dialogue, we cover everything. But Em, as we were planning this before the session, we had decided that there were a few key things that we wanted to be sure that our audience, our listeners, had an opportunity to really understand. First of all, the importance of ISO. ISO as a global standards organization, and more importantly, the importance of specific ISO standards that have been released into the community. We want to talk a little bit about accreditation bodies. I think accreditation is one of those things that for those outside of our business looking in, it can be very confusing, quite frankly. There's so many definitions, so many roles that have to be remembered, and how does it all go together? So I think we're going to spend a little bit of time talking through that to help our listeners understand what they really need to be focused on, most specifically as it relates to choosing a quality partner. We'll talk about how ISO, specifically through their management system, sets the foundation for other frameworks, ways for organizations to implement an operating system for their organization that can then be extended to meet other regulatory requirements. We'll talk about my favorite topic, I think, ISO 42001 and its rise and where we see it hitting over time. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about, just your perspective on what we see coming next from ISO, and what the market really needs to know so that they can begin preparing. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds great.
Awesome. Okay, so for our listeners, a couple of things before we kick into the agenda. First of all, after our session, please stay on for just a few moments. We will have a survey. We would love to collect your feedback to ensure that we get better at delivering value for you. Secondly, as you have questions, I will do my best to monitor the Q&A section. As your questions come in, if they're appropriate for where we are, we'll stop and talk through them. If we don't have an opportunity to address all your questions, we'll follow up after the fact and try to close those loops as best we can. So please know, ask, it will not go unaddressed, even if it's not addressed on the call today. Okay, so Em, let's start with this, the importance of ISO, specifically ISO management system standards. I think there are kind of three bigs that we see today in the market. We see 27001, 27701, and then of course 42001. Maybe for our audience, you could just explain a little bit about what those standards are and the value they really bring to the global community.
Yeah, no, I definitely think those are the three that we work the most with our customer base. And it's funny because my husband always makes fun of me that ISO is just a bunch of numbers and acronyms. So I'm going to do my best to talk through them.
Some more. Yes.
So the ISO 27001 standard is the primary one that we see most of our customers coming to us for, and that is the information security management system. So this is, I think, the most applicable to companies that are out there, just as far as, making sure that their customer data is protected and they've got all the controls in place that they need to really help achieve that overall compliance to 27001. The 27701 is the privacy management, management system. And privacy is an extension right now to 27001. So you do both at the same time. I know we're going to talk about some of those changes a little bit later. And then 42001, obviously the biggest one that has come out, the most recent, and that is around the AI management system. So this is new, and I think a lot of companies aren't sure how to approach it, but we have seen an increase in customers looking at how do they get started with this. So between the three, I do think that overall, what's great with the ISO standard is that it is applicable on a global scale. It's not something that's specific to a certain country or region. It really is that global scale. So I think for companies, it is attractive because everybody in the compliance space knows what ISO is. And so it's able to really have that reach where other standards might just be specific to, regions, countries, or whatnot. So I think the importance ultimately for customers is just showing that you are dedicated to protecting your customer data, and you do that by implementing the management system and the controls that go with that. The last piece I'm going to say is I do think ISO is unique in the fact that it has the continual improvement model built into it. So
Yeah.
for companies, what that means is it's not just a one-time a year audit, right? As you're going throughout the year and you're making changes or adding new products, really being able to take that into your management system, your risk assessment, your internal audit, and think throughout the year of how you're building your controls around those new areas. So I do think that that is a unique perspective for ISO.
Unique and critical. And we actually just received a question. Dylan,
Oh,
thank you. The question is there a set list of controls for each ISO framework? By that I mean, are there companies that want to implement ISO 27001 required to implement the same controls regardless of their industry, size, scope, etc.? And Em, I'll let you talk about this, but Dylan, in your question is the answer, and that's
mhm.
all around the concept of scoping. So Em, maybe.
Yeah, so for each ISO standard, it's going to be made up of the clauses and annex controls. So the clauses are required every year we test these. They have to be implemented, and it's usually around your management reviews, your risk assessments. The annex controls, though, well, I'll take a step back. So for ISO, there's a statement of applicability. So this is pretty critical to defining what your scope is ultimately going to be. But before you start understanding what controls are in or out, the scope is what you've really got to define. So understanding what comprises your management system, which teams are going to be involved in it. And once you can figure that out, then within your statement of applicability is where you can really review those controls. You can add controls in. It is very flexible to what your organization needs. So hopefully that is a short answer without getting too far into it.
Yeah, and maybe if I could expand just a little
Yeah.
bit, but this is so near and dear to my heart. So, Dylan, to maybe add just a layer, so scoping and context, as we think about, Emily mentioned the same set of clauses. So we've got the same management commitments across all ISO management system standards, the most important of which are scoping and context. We're in an organization determines the scoping, that is the domain around which the management system will offer governance and management, and then context. And so that the context is really the organization's opportunity to step out of the day to day and think about who they really are. How do you as an organization really create value in your ecosystem? So with that, you have an opportunity to think about your internal and external stakeholders. So what's important to the internal people who have something at stake with how we're delivering value, and the external people. And from an external perspective, we have a chance to think through things like contractual agreements, so commitments we've made our customers, external regulation based on where we operate, or based on the vertical that we're in. Are there external regulatory requirements that need to be considered as a stakeholder? And then
Yeah.
with that, we have an opportunity, as Em said, to build out the scoping statement in context with a statement of applicability that meets the unique needs of our organization. And like, that is the beauty of any ISO management system standard. Though it can apply to everyone in the world, it applies in such a way that it is uniquely tailored, like a custom tailored suit to the
Mhm.
individual of the organization in question. So it's just absolutely incredible the way they've designed these things to be so highly extensible to meet
For sure.
anyone's, and yet still provide the same mechanisms for efficient production of value. So
Yeah.
it's, yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
Great question.
yeah. Next up, um, we talked a little bit about the importance of ISO as we think about ISO certification. I think organizations can choose to do a couple things. That they can build a management system, again, to bring efficiencies all across their business as they're delivering some value. But then they can also choose through ISO management systems and certification bodies like ours to undergo external validation and certification.
Okay.
you saying that as being a driver for organizations? And what value does external certification actually provide?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great topic. So yeah, most of our customers come to us because it's a contractual need that they have with a potential customer that they're looking at, or really just wanting some type of validation that they can give to bring some peace to their customers' minds of, okay, our data is being protected. So a lot of times when we're going through the certification process, I think it's always a scary journey to be on for most of our customers because anybody getting audited is not excited about it, right? But I think if you go through it, really our approach is, it is again that continual improvement. So when you're going through and getting an audit done externally, it is helping show your areas of improvement. Now they come in the form of non-conformities with ISO, but at the end of it, it really is meant to help you improve. And every year you get better, right? And you kind of find where the gaps are and whatnot. So I do think when you go through the journey and then getting the certificate at the end of it, that holds a lot of weight when it's an accredited cert too. That's an important piece of it. But just being able to give that to customers, it's easy to be able to hand it to them. They can read your scope, they can see the locations that are included in that. So I do think that there is a lot of value in going through the external process. If we're going to take the time to build out a management system, go through the external, so that way you can at least have that certificate that you can give to kind of build that brand for your business.
The brand trust, it really is. Now, you just mentioned something that I think is important. We had laid it out as one of our agenda items, so maybe we start with it now. But this concept of accreditation, I mean,
Yeah.
is accreditation different than certification? If so, why? Why do I even care?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. And yes, they are different. And it gets tricky because I think the words all kind of sound similar, but the certification is the certificate that you're getting. It's the certification and the audit process that you're going through that results in the certificate. Now, the accreditation piece comes from the perspective of who is validating that certificate. So it goes back even a step further of for us to be able to issue the certificate that would be considered accredited, we as a certification body have to go through a whole audit process with an accreditation body. So for us to issue those certificates, we have to be accredited to do so. Now, it is important to note that a certification body can issue certificates without being accredited. So the biggest way to identify if your certificate is accredited or not is going to be the seals that are on that. So whether it has, the ANAB or IAS seals that are on that, the IAS symbol is not an accreditation body, but it is a piece of it that can, tie into it. So all of that to say, the accreditation body is important because it can mean whether or not it's certified or not as a certificate. So I will say we have had customers come to us with a certificate thinking it's valid, and then we have to tell them it's actually not valid. And we walk them through that process and help explain it. So it is important when you're choosing a vendor to know, or really a partner, I feel like, what they're made up of, right? Who are they getting accredited by, and what does that look like?
And so, Em, it almost sounds like us having to eat our own dog food in a way, and that we'll evaluate and certify management systems for our customers, but
Yeah,
then we're evaluated against a standard of professional practice ultimately, which in my mind is really what accreditation is. It's this mechanism that allows us to be tested, us
yeah,
to ensure that we're performing in a way that meets or exceeds not only quality, but
yeah,
also professional standards related to audit.
yeah.
And so it does feel like it very much sets us and those that are accredited to offer certification apart from the certification bodies that just kind of go through an exam and issue a PowerPoint slide that that has a fancy logo on it. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And I do think that a lot of the customers are not, they don't even fully understand what it means for us to be accredited and go through that audit process ourselves because with it every year, we go through an office audit with our accreditation bodies, and that is where we sit down with them and they select a random client and we walk through that file, the certificate, all the way from beginning to end. And we do that for multiple clients that we're looking at. And so that in itself is rigorous. And then on top of it, we actually have to be through or go through witness audits with our accreditation bodies where they sit in and they observe our auditors to make sure that they're going through the process and they're covering everything that they need to. So we have to do that for every standard that we offer and for every accreditation body that we have.
Oh, and
Yeah.
that may be a good point. So I think about this. So we're a certification body, and there can be
Mhm.
multiple certification bodies. There are. So
Yeah.
you're saying that for accreditation, there can also be multiple accreditation bodies or accreditation boards?
Yes. So within the US, we've got a couple that are out there. So A&AB is the biggest one that we have in the US as far as being able to issue certificates. So they don't issue the certificate necessarily, but their seal is on the certificates that their certification bodies issue.
Okay.
So with A-LIGN, when we issue our certificates, most of them are with that A&AB seal. There's also other accreditation bodies such as IAS. I think UAF is another one. But I do think that there is a level of quality that is between each of those accreditation bodies.
And Em, I was going to ask if the level of due care, the level of conformity to the professional standard is the same. Is the expectation the same across
I
accreditation?
do, yeah, I do think that, what we've heard and what we have also experienced ourselves is that when you're going with a different accreditation body, they all operate a little bit differently. While they audit against the same standard, their interpretation of it sometimes varies. And so I do
Okay.
think that that can lead to maybe a different level of quality when you're going through that. It is similar almost to a certification body, right? Every certification body audits a little bit differently and they interpret the standard differently. And so that level of quality kind of depends on their take on it.
Okay. And I've seen instances, and so to say this to our audience, so every environment's unique. I mean, that really just is what it is in so many
Yep.
ways. Nonetheless, ISO for us, for each management system standard we can certify. We also have guidance through various guidance numbers, but we have guidance as a certification body about how to think about building out the assessment plan.
Yes.
And included in that are the number of auditor days required to cover an assessment of a given scoping. And so ultimately, too many words to say for you buyers, when you get an evaluation from us, as we look at building your plan and we quote you a number of assessment days, that should be the same for every certification body that you speak to in the world. So I've seen instances where there is some drift. And so maybe where there is drift and things vary wildly, it's due to the
Yep.
accreditation body having a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, I think it comes from a little bit of the accreditation body flexibility, but then certification bodies too. What we will see is that there is some wiggle room within, so to say, the 27006 standards and 1721 of reductions that you can take in those days. And I think what we've seen is that some companies will take more of a reduction maybe than what we would typically expect to see.
Okay.
But in all honesty, it's adding to the risk, right? When you take too much production, now you're risking and compromising the integrity of the audit and making sure that you have enough time to really go through and do your due diligence as an auditor. So I whenever we come up against that, I'm always like, okay, here's the table, here's your scope, here's the days. So it
Yeah.
is hard to see when, I mean, because we've seen some things where the days are just drastically different. And in my mind, it's a couple of days and it's covering multiple standards. And I have to sit back and think, how in the world do they cover all these standards in such a short amount of time? And if I was a buyer, while the price might be great and it might sound wonderful to do an audit in a few days, you do have to take a step back and think, okay, realistically, do they cover everything that they should be in that amount of time? And am I really getting a quality audit, right? And yeah.
And I think quality has to remain key. I mean, I think IT folks have the saying, good, fast, cheap, pick two.
Yeah.
And I think that the saying applies here.
Yeah,
Quality isn't always inexpensive. It doesn't have to be. It can be, but
yeah,
ultimately, quality has to be the goal. It just
yeah.
does. And Em, we've got another question from Ken. Ken, thank you. Ken says, I think an important distinction that only auditors must be accredited. An important distinction is that only auditors must be accredited in order to certify another company as meeting a standard, such as ISO 27001, but an auditor does not have to be ISO 27001 certified themselves unless they have a business need. So, Ken, really quickly, kind of what I'm reading in this is business needs driving certification. Absolutely. It's really important that everyone understands that all ISO management systems and certifications are voluntary.
Yep,
Everyone can choose to participate, can choose not to participate. You might have market pressure that makes it involuntary or mandatory for you. But by
yeah,
and large, ISO does not force their standards on anyone.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Ken, I hope that answered your question. And we talked a little bit about accreditation bodies. You mentioned ours,
Mhm.
ANAB. It's the American National Standards Institute, so ANSI, National Accreditation Board body. I forget what the
Yep.
last B is. Maybe you could share a little bit with the audience about ANAB, but why we do have such a core belief in the quality of ANAB.
For sure. Yeah. No, and I was talking to a coworker earlier today too, and just our, the tenure that we've had with A&B specifically. And, what we've really seen as we've gone, through the last few years and just the way that the landscape has changed and the dynamics and, the new pressure in the market of, like you said, faster, easier, cheaper, and how we combat that. And so I think for working with AMAB, we have always had a really good experience in the sense of the findings that we receive and being able to apply those and just the level of detail that they're going into when we're going through our audits and learning ways that we can do things better too. But I think more so them being able to validate and verify, yes, you are doing things the right way as in accordance with the standard, right? Not to air, but that we're meeting everything that we need to as a certification body. And so for us, knowing that ANAB is one of the top producers of certificates that have their seal on it, I should say, that for us is comforting because we know that while it is US specific, there are companies around the world that know who ANAB is, right? So it having the level of reach that it does has been important for us too as a sweet lead because obviously we want to be able to operate in all markets and that adds to it. So I think it is just the level of detail and rigor of the audits. While again, nobody wants to be audited, I do think that it is worth getting a quality audit ourselves so that we provide them the best experience for our customers as well as it's the level of quality and audits that we're performing.
And yeah, I think about direct parallels to my life. So in high school, I had an English teacher
Uh-huh.
that I was scared to death of. I would submit assignments and she would use a red pen to mark them up. And so this thing
Yeah,
would looking like it had just been sliced to death. I
right.
recognize now the value of that process, though, in
Yeah,
being held to a higher standard. The quality I was able to produce
sure.
was also therefore much higher. And I think
Right.
for us, that's something that we really believe in. Let's set
Yeah,
ourselves to a higher standard so that the quality and therefore the value we deliver to our customers is
yeah,
also a higher standard. So thank you for keeping us in alignment, in
yeah,
conformity with those higher expectations.
yeah, yeah,
And then ANSI is an American accreditation body, but the ISO standards are international. I mean,
yeah.
have you seen ways in which organizations, whether they're domestic or global, are using ISO certification to meet international needs, requirements, business pressures?
Yeah, no, I think again the reach that ISO has and being known on that global scale really helps companies also say, I'm not just ISO certified, but I think that the accreditation body, while they are country specific, they do get known outside of that country, right? So like I said, with ANAB, although it's US specific, it is known across the world. And we do have customers all over the world that while they're not in the US, they're still getting ISO certified, and that ANAB seal works great for them because their customers know it too. So I think it is that level of just brand awareness, in all honesty, when it comes to who ANAB is, and you know, there's other accreditation bodies in other countries, but I think for the most part, they all operate at different levels of the quality that they're providing. So when you're, as a certification body, when you're aligning with one, you want to make sure that it is in alignment with what you're trying to achieve as well, and you know, with quality or yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now, as I think about the management systems themselves, I'm shifting a little bit away from accreditation, um, and more toward building the management system, the real operating system for our organization. Earlier, we talked a little bit about scoping and context, and we talked about this thing that you call the statement of applicability, an SOA. As we think about external regulation in Europe,
Yep.
we know this past year that many businesses have just been overwhelmed with either the EUAI Act, with NIS2, DORA, Digital Services Act, you name it. The list goes on and on. Is there a way for those organizations to use the core of a management system to extend up to meet those external regulations?
For sure. So I do think that is one of the great things with the ISO standard, and more specifically 27001, since it is information security based. It does have a more holistic approach or view of the company. And so what we've seen our customers do is they will take their current management system and they will bake into it these additional regulations that are out there to get included into their statement of applicability. If there's GDPR that they have to be compliant with, we'll see them incorporate those into their management system itself, because the 27001 standard is used as a base for some of these frameworks, but it also has so many overlapping principles or aspects of this management standard that it's able to apply, and it's kind of covering some of these standards or new regulations already through the controls they've got implemented by having 27001 or 42001 if you're looking at, you know, the AI Act or, you know, those wonderful things. So I do think that it works as a great foundation, as a starting point to say, okay, we'll implement the management system, get our controls in place, and now look at the next thing that you have to do, and kind of how does that incorporate into your system.
And I think one thing we'd be remiss not to say, just plainly for listeners, is NIS2 DORA. Let's consider that as an example. So we build an ISMS, so we build a 27001 management system, and we extend it out to include controls through our scoping statement and SOA, controls for NIS2 and DORA. As you go to have that management system certified, you will be evaluated against everything that you've said you do with your statement of applicability in context to your scoping statement.
Yeah,
You'll get a certification for ISO 27001, not NIS2 and DORA. So the
correct.
point of the management system isn't direct certification against those external regulations, different
Yeah,
mechanisms. And in fact, you'll do self-reporting for those.
yeah,
The benefit of the management system is it allows your organization to build a single system from which you can
yeah,
create an external reporting for those entities at time of need. So effectively,
exactly.
you're in a position that you have everything structured the way it needs to be structured so you can be successful in telling the story that you need to tell.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great foundation to add the building blocks onto. And it's a great point that the certificate will be for 27001, but it is something that you can rely on to show then, okay, well, we've implemented the NIS2 articles or additional control sets, you know, whatever it is that you need to help satisfy those. So it's not all for nothing, right? There is definitely a benefit in going through that.
And then we have a question from Casey Stanley. Can you talk about the efficiencies a business gets from implementing ISO 27001 if they choose to implement other ISO management systems? So the integrated management system, the
Yeah.
IMS. Yeah, you care to share a little bit your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think we've actually seen this a lot with 27,001 and 42,001. You know, clients that already have 27,001 and they're looking at 42,001. And that's the biggest question that we get is, well, where's the overlap? How can I easily bake this into it? And I do think it's important to understand that each of the standards have their own requirements, right? There are, 42,001, there is that AI aspect that you have to incorporate into it. But at the end of it, the management system itself, they do have the overlapping themes across them that it's really evaluating what you currently have in place to say, okay, how does the privacy or the AI fit into what we're already doing and aligning those controls? If there is overlap, just making sure that it's descriptive enough that you can show I'm covering all three by doing that. So I think it's a misconception that companies have to create a management system individually. You can, but there's definitely efficiencies if you look at what you've got and how the scope of that is incorporating with whichever standard you have first, and that you're building off of. So there's definitely efficiencies to be gained in how you're writing out your policies, implementing your controls, doing your risk assessments, all of those good things. So
Yeah, and when you look at the structure, the design of ISO management systems, so ISO has chosen to incorporate the same high-level structure across all management systems. So effectively, the management commitments that we're looking for will be the same regardless of focus. We expect management to scope and context their organization. We expect leadership to make certain commitments. We expect planning to happen, operationalization, if I can say that right,
yeah,
has to happen. Support has to be there. We have to measure. We have to understand what's happening in the environment. We have to commit to continuous improvement, no matter the focus, whether it's security, privacy, or AI. And so the integrated management system, in my mind, is a way for an organization to take really a known good framework in the ISO management system standard, integrate it so that as a single operating system, they can ensure that their activities and their governance are really driving business value, not
so
looking at things in a fractured, siloed sort of way.
um,
Um, which, maybe not a good time, but a great question.
yeah.
We have Jess Williams. Can you speak to the use case of ISO 42001 a bit? Is it more for organizations working with or developing LLMs and AI applications? We're supposed to help with general AI usage.
It's a great question, and I will say it applies to all. It was 42,001 is definitely if you have interacted with the standard at all, I think what's important to know is that those roles have been defined. And if you
Yeah.
look at those roles, it really touches all aspects of it. So if you are a user of AI, if you're a developer of AI, and I think it's important to understand how am I interacting with AI, whether it's developing it, using it, right? What I just said. That is really going to set the tone for the scope and what it is that you're going to be implementing from a management system perspective. So I think the use case is going to be based on your business needs and again how you're interacting with it from what we've seen.
Based on your scoping and context, and just to expand just a little bit more. So when we talked about scoping, we talked a little bit about context. As we get into really the AI life cycle, what ISO has recognized is that there are a lot of different roles at play in this ecosystem. But from a scoping, a governance and control perspective, generally we think in three broad buckets.
Yes.
So an organization can be a producer. These are orgs that are actually developing models, refining models, training models. You think Microsoft, Anthropic, OpenAI. So that's one defined role in the ecosystem. Another defined role in the ecosystem are providers. And I think we deal with a lot of providers, these orgs that are delivering some sort of service to their customers and are consuming frontier models, large language models, whatever. They're consuming something from the producers that sit above them, integrating it, packaging their secret sauce, and selling it to customers. So those are providers. And then just to your point, kind of the latter example, there are also organizations that are just using Microsoft Copilot to do what they
Right.
do. We want to offer some sort of assurance to their customers that they're doing the right things. And in those instances, the role of the bucket is customer And so as you work through actually defining your context and thinking about everything else that happens in your
Mhm.
unique context, you'll self-identify as either one or a combination of those three roles. So it's critically important. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, and I think that's you touched on a good point there, Patrick, is it's really understanding what the scope of your management system for AI is going to be, because there are some that think, oh, I'm every role, and they just want to get every role certified because they
Yeah.
want to, the blanket. And then when you take a step back, it's like, okay, let's really think about how you're interacting with it. Does that scope really make sense? And this is really for any of the management systems. The scope is the most key part of this. So if you're unsure about your scope, I would highly recommend digging into that, taking some evaluations internally of how you operate just to make sure that you get that piece right from the beginning.
Yeah. And then I would layer in kind of a dovetail to something you mentioned earlier as you were talking about feedback and opportunities for improvement. That, I think for our listeners, it becomes critically important that your choice to pursue a management system is
Mhm.
not about certification. We hope that you choose to certify, to
Yes,
go
I
off to
agree.
your customers and offer your
Yeah,
customer assurance that you're doing the right things. But really, the goal with pursuit of a management system has to be around making your company better, more
yeah,
efficient, more consistent at creating the outcomes you want, and then optimizing risk and cost along the way.
yeah.
I think clause four, clause five, there's
Mhm.
actually a line in each of the management system standards that as we think about creating policy, as we think about actually setting out to create the management system, we
Mhm.
first and foremost have to ensure that it aligns with our business goals. And
Right.
so really this is an exercise in ensuring that you're doing business well with the added benefit of offering tons of assurance to your customers and those in your supply chain.
Yeah. Yeah, I think with ISO, it makes it, the way that it approaches it to exactly what you just said, it makes it hard to be a check the box audit, right? Because it has to be
100%.
so, yeah, implemented and so part of your culture. And it really does change the culture, I think, of companies when they have a management system. So, yeah, it is not a check the box kind of standard. It's very involved. And I think with AI in 42001, there's in the market, I feel like there's a lot of uncertainty around companies that use AI and how your data is being interacted with. And so I do think one of the use cases is just being able to provide some reassurances to your company or your customers that you have considered those risks and you are being ethical with AI and how you're using it. And I think 42001 is a great job of that. No.
And then for our listeners, maybe, and there might not be a great deal of contrast, but maybe if you wouldn't care to talk just a little bit about how we as a certification body think about audit for 27001 versus 42001. Maybe they're the same.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say, for us, well, with every standard, there's a set of requirements and competency is what it comes down to of defined set of competencies that our auditors have to go through in order to do the audits themselves. So there's differences between the two as far as having AI background and knowledge or, just information security. But when it comes to the approach of the audit, we approach them the same way, right? We have the standard, we have how we're interpreting it and how we're auditing against it, and really ensuring that the customers are just meeting the intent of it. So with 27001, the scope is a little bit different versus AI and the controls that get implemented, but ultimately because they are so similar in structure with the clauses and even the annex controls, it is we have the same approach to both of them. It's more just a matter of the technical aspects.
And then in those technical aspects, as I think about 42001, at least for me, I've experienced a lot of maybe concern because of misunderstanding. But with 42001, because it is focused on the AI life cycle, as those assessments, are we doing statistical analysis of outputs to ensure no bias exists? Are we doing, what is it that we're actually doing that would be any different than what we've done with 27001 or any other management system?
Yeah, great question. I would say no, it's not going down these rabbit holes, right? For the technical controls that are part of 42001, It's more of us understanding, okay, at the end of the day, here's the standard. Did you meet it? And how are you meeting it? Right? We want to just see, how are you approaching it? How did you implement controls around it to make sure that you're doing it ethically, responsibly, right? That you're hitting all of the things that are required. Um, and again, with auditing, it's always, there's a judgment piece to it, but ultimately is, did you implement it? Is it operating? And again, how did you meet it? And every customer is different. And again, I think it goes back to ISO being unique in that sense, is that it really is up to the customers and how they interpret the standard as well, right? So it's more of, are you meeting the intent of it? And that varies between our customers. Some customers have very in-depth controls that we'll test against and make sure, that they're hitting everything that they need to. But it depends on how the customers are setting it up and how they're building out their management system.
Okay. And then M, I mean, I know it's hard to talk numbers, and it's hard to be very empirical with a question like this, but are you saying the market move more toward trusting 42001 as a way to offer assurance around AI development and use?
We are. So I will say, I think customers, again, they hear AI and they automatically get nervous. And then you add auditing on top of it, and they're even more nervous about, what does it look like? It's it's gonna be an audit we've never had before or experienced before. When in reality, if you take a step back and while AI is the main component, there's still the core pieces of that, with your internal audit and your risk assessment. There's things that you're already doing. It's just applying now that AI layer to it. So when you think of your AI controls, how does that differ from what you already had? And if you look at it, you're probably doing most of it. It's just adding the word AI and making you think differently about it. So I do think we're seeing people, as they go through it, or customers, get more comfortable with the thought and the concept of it as they better understand it. So I always think it's worth it to go buy the standard and just read it. If you see,
100%.
yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't, it's not, oh, what do they say? It's a good like nighttime read.
Yeah,
But
yeah. It's not a great page turner, but if you want to
yeah,
go to sleep,
yeah, it's
yeah.
it is helpful. So I do recommend that if you're interested or think it could apply, to read it and see.
And then we actually have a comment, which I think this is great because you hit on this earlier. So I think coming back to this is very timely. But the comment is from Eric. So thank you, Eric. As with 27701, 42001 seems to be a unique subset of 27001. So, and maybe talk a little bit about standalone management systems versus extensions to management systems.
Yeah, it's a good point. So they are standalones. When we think of a subset or an extension, think more 27001 and 27701. So that the privacy, the way that it is today, it is really built into 27001, and it's taking the clauses and annex controls that are in 27001, but extending it to now include privacy. So it is really adding a privacy layer on top of it, where 42001 is truly its own management system. There's no reliance on 27001. I think where the confusion comes in, though, is that the structure is so similar that people,
HLS.
yes, they
Yeah.
almost think, oh, it's an extension, when in reality they are separated. But I think it goes back to what you said, Patrick, of the integrated management system, right? And if you can fully understand how that works and build it in that sense, then I think it's very confusing between all of them. But to clarify, they are separate. Yeah, for one.
And then another comment from Eric. Eric, thank you so much. But Eric says we're actually using a combination of 42001 for our base management
Okay.
system and then extending it to include controls from NIST. And Eric, I assume NIST AI risk management framework, and maybe some other security controls, OWASP, and a few others specifically for AI. And so
Yeah,
that's a prime example of what we've been talking about, defining scoping and then
yeah.
extending through our statement of applicability to meet very specific needs for an organization.
Yeah, no. And we see a lot of customers that do this, that are trying to cover a lot, because I think we actually had one of our customers say this maybe on a panel that we had earlier this year. But what's challenging as an organization is there's so many different frameworks now that you have to be compliant with, and to do them individually is not effective, right? It's not efficient, doesn't save any time or cost or anything. So I do think it is a great idea to look at what your business needs are, right? What are the different compliances or compliance frameworks that you have to adhere to, and then understand what is the best one to kind of build off of. And I think 27001 again is a good foundation to layer in all of those components.
Especially in considering that any NIST standard we can assess, but we can't certify. There are
Yeah,
instances we can offer
yeah,
assertion, attestation that things are in place and conform to the standard as laid out. But NIST
yeah,
isn't in the certification business, nor is OWASP. And so in
right.
instances where people know based on your own domain expertise that there are certain controls that are just applicable to do what you want to do to serve your customers well,
Yeah,
incorporate those in your management system. We'll
yeah,
evaluate them as part of the overall evaluation, and then you'll still walk out of that event with a certification that you can offer your customers.
for sure. Yeah. No, I do. I think it's a great way to help satisfy those while also doing it in the most efficient manner that you can. So yeah, I think it's a great point.
Yes, ma'am. And one more question, and then we'll come back to our agenda from Casey Stanley. So Casey says, hey, is there value in a company purchasing 27002? And I think this is a great question. And maybe if you wouldn't mind to do a little bit of edifying for me in particular, the difference between 27001 and 27002 and how they actually fit together.
Yeah, I know that's a great question. And I will tell you, we do get this a lot. Sometimes we'll have organizations come to us and they'll say, okay, I see 27001, but we need the certificate on 27002. And it's always challenging to explain because it gets a little confusing. But 27001, when we're doing our audits and we're going through it, it extends out to 27002. But you actually can't put 27002 on a certificate because it's not certifiable. It is just giving additional guidance on how to implement, give that additional context to the 27001 standard. So they do work together, but 27002 is almost just more of an explanation. It's you can't certify it, we can't put it on the certificate, but it does get incorporated into the audits and how, when we're going through it and making sure that we're covering all aspects. So it's almost like taking a deeper dive into it.
It's so interesting and it's still confusing to me. But
I know.
in ISO, we'll see management system standards, which is
Yeah,
largely what we'll certify. Those management system standards call on normative references or supporting documents, also from ISO, that
yeah,
can be technical reports. So you'll see a TR, you'll see TGs, which are technical guidance. I mean, you'll see all these things that become super supplemental
yes,
and become the mechanism that the management system standard will use to clarify what it means when it says,
exactly.
even though those external documents, to your point, weren't certifiable. We still have to
Yeah,
look at the operating system, if you will.
yeah. Yeah, no, there's a lot. And then we also run into the mandatory documents that get published, and then each accreditation body has their own set of guidance that they give to certification bodies. So, yeah, all to say it can get very confusing quickly. But if you're ever in doubt, or if you have, if you hear of a standard or, one of the technical documents that are out there, just ask your auditor. They can usually give you insight into what it's for, how to use it, that's what we'll deal for to help explain some of those things that can get a little bit confusing.
And then things are changing.
Yeah,
They have been sometimes more quickly than others. I think of the GPT quote in this ever evolving world. So in this ever evolving landscape, but we know that things are
yeah,
constantly changing. And it seems that the same is true with ISO standards. And so
yeah,
you did a little bit of explaining about 27701 being an extension of 27001. The
yeah.
PIM is an extension of the ISMS. My understanding is that that might be changing as well. I mean, do you have any context on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually think it helps to take a step back. So for those listening, I guess, they may or may not be familiar that 27001 actually went through an update at the end of 2022. When that update happened, it almost misaligned a little bit with 27701. And as far as the new pieces that 27001 was now looking at, because those updates really did help modernize the standard a bit because 2013 was the last time it had been updated. So a lot changed, right, in those almost 10 years of difference there. So once 27001 got updated, I think it was recognized, okay, 27701 now needs to be updated to align better with that. And I believe in that process, they took a step back, the writers, studies of the standards, to say privacy is pretty big. So would it make more sense for this to become its own management system in a standalone, where it's not relying on 27001, but it would be its own management system? And that's the direction that we're seeing this going, is it becoming a standalone. When the updates for 2022 came out in 27001, I think customers were expecting an update for 27701 to happen shortly after. It's taken a little bit of time, but I think they really want to make sure they're getting it right as they're writing the standard. So all of that to say, I do think that the changes are going to be coming out hopefully fairly soon. I would say by the end of the year is what we're looking at, but it could be sooner. So I would say at least in the next 6 months, we're going to see changes around this. If you have 27701 currently, there'll probably be a transition period for you to go through. You won't lose your certification, I have to imagine. You would maintain it, but just transition for any changes that are happening. I think it's going to be a great opportunity for organizations that need privacy, right? Like those that are looking at GDPR or CCPA or any of the other privacy standards, and now being able to have a dedicated management system for privacy. I do think there's a lot of benefit to that without having to necessarily be tied to 27001. So long-winded answer, but hopefully that gives a little bit of insight that yes, it's changing. We're expecting it soon. There'll obviously be lots of communication once that comes out, but yeah, here in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with everything you said. I think in a lot of ways we've had an issue with principles versus practice, if that makes sense. And so with 27001, with privacy controls as an extension, that kind of makes sense in practice, as we'll be implementing technical controls in a lot of ways in a similar fashion. From a principles perspective, however, privacy and security are very, very different. With with the introduction of 42001, what we're saying is that those in charge of AI governance typically are also those associated with governing privacy in an organization.
Yep.
And we've almost got a situation today where 27001 is competing in focus with 42001 for people that are actually driving these programs, these governance programs inside organizations. So in principle, privacy kind of feels more like it would be in the camp of AI governance, or AI governance in the camp of privacy, however you want to look at that. In practice, it's just not that way. And so what I see ISO doing by separating privacy into its own management system is effectively creating a three-legged stool for governance for organizations, so that you can have a robust baseline to build around and build from, again, based on your unique context that addresses any industry, any vertical, any company, any size. These organizations will have a mechanism to build an integrated management system that ensures that they're doing the right thing, that they're protecting confidentiality, integrity, availability, that they're protecting privacy of sensitive information, that they're developing and using AI in a responsible way, all from one management system. So I think it's brilliant what ISO's doing. Also recognize that there's going to be a lot of market education that's needed to ensure that organizations actually get the value of this, the real business value of pursuing the independent standalone management systems.
Yeah, no, you said it very well. I do think that they're setting it up nicely for organizations to kind of cover all their bases.
Yes, ma'am. And we've talked a lot about the standards themselves. We've talked about accreditation, certification bodies. We've talked domestic use, international use. I actually have one more question. I think we've got a few more minutes from Eric that really asks about auditor credentials. And so Eric says, please explain how someone may become an auditor that produces ISO certification for a company. And so, maybe if you could just talk about the requirements in the management system standard, audit standards, 27006, 42006, the expectation for auditor qualifications.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And 27006 actually supports the 27001 standard, and it recently went through an update as well. So most certification bodies are going through a transition internally to make sure we still hit all of the changes that have been happening. Same for 42006. It's going to be finalized here soon. But ultimately within that standard, it is going through and saying, here are the minimum requirements for an auditor. And I do think it's important to understand with ISO that there's a difference between auditor and lead auditor, and then there's actually multiple other roles outside of that. So,
Well,
yeah, yeah. So, I will say anybody can go out and get an ISO 27001 lead auditor certificate, right? You can go through the training, you can take the test, and you can get that. But for you to actually perform the audits, there's multiple other requirements that go through that. So, part of the requirements or the competency, as they refer to it, is making sure that you have that training, making sure you have a background in it. You do have to have education that falls into each of the realms, whether it's AI or information security, having some type of education, background, years of experience. I will say it's always challenging to get to lead auditor because you do have to have multiple years of experience. In the 27006 update, they've actually changed. It used to be a set number of years, and now it's open to be a little bit more flexible. So yeah, you have to have the years of experience. And then on top of that, you also have to go through and shadow and then be witness. So I
oh,
did mention, yeah, I mentioned earlier, our auditors get witnessed by or are witnessed by A&AB and some of the other accreditation bodies to make sure they're doing it correctly. Well, we internally also witness our auditors. So every auditor gets witnessed by somebody on our team that's qualified. Just again to make sure that they're understanding the standard correctly, they're applying it correctly. So to be an auditor, the requirements are a little bit less. To be a lead auditor, the requirements are a little bit more, stringent. So it does take quite a bit to be able to be an auditor and lead these engagements. And then that's the auditor piece. And then as a CB, we have a full set of requirements that we have to follow as well to issue those certificates. But
and just to clarify, you said
yeah,
witness. Does that mean observe? Is that effectively what
yes,
you're talking
yes.
about?
Yep. So somebody sits in and observes. It's a little intimidating because they don't say anything, right? They can't speak. They can't give
So,
any interruptions. Yeah,
yeah,
you really don't get their insight or their knowledge, or questions until the very end. So they will literally just sit in, they'll observe the whole thing, and at the end they'll go through and say, we noticed for this, you did this. And then sometimes they ask questions, they want to understand why you did something the way that you did. So again, there's a lot of interpretation that happens within the management systems and the standard itself. So yeah, somebody sits in and observes.
and so, Em, just to connect some dots really quickly, it sounds like through accreditation, there's a mechanism to ensure we talked about the standard of professional practice.
Yeah,
That standard of professional practice extends beyond how we quote, how we write reports. Our auditors are actually evaluated, they're tested, they're witnessed,
yeah,
observed before they can be released to actually run audits on their own. So there's quality control inherent in the system from the very beginning for any new
yeah,
auditor.
yeah,
Amazing.
yeah. Yeah, there's it's interesting because I think, our customers always see they just go through the audit, they get the certificate, but the engine that runs behind that and everything that goes into it really is a there's so many checks and balances throughout the entire process. But yeah, a lot goes into an auditor being able to sit and do the audit on their own. So
And I'm just asked the question. I think I know the answer, but I'll ask so I don't assume. Will unaccredited auditors be held to the same standard?
so if you're not accredited, the
I,
certification, yeah, the certification body can have any auditor do anything, right? So I do think that it goes back to if there is an accreditation body that seal is being put on your certificate. Again, it's a set of layers that go into that, right? That build into it, and gives that peace of mind that, okay, in order for the CD to do this, the auditor had to go through the set requirements that the accreditation body is looking at. So it almost validates that the auditors that we're using are, I hate to say this word because it always sounds, I don't know, rude in a way, but they're competent, right? And they know what they're doing to perform these audits. So yeah.
And then to use the sports analogy, it almost feels like through our ANAB accreditation, we're ensuring that we're putting professionals on the field,
Yes.
not amateurs.
Correct. Yeah,
Yes.
that's actually part of the training. When you go through this lead auditor training, it's making sure that they go through the professional and the lead auditor requirements for that.
And thank you so much.
Yeah,
I
thanks for
just got
having me.
notification that we're up
I
on time. It's crazy. For everyone that joined us today, thank you. If you have any additional questions, please reach out. Those questions that we weren't able to answer from Q&A, we'll follow up.
Yeah,
Yeah, I hate to volunteer you, but I think it's okay to say we're both available anytime. If there are any things that you want to talk through, think about your
yeah,
strategy, just understand better. Don't hesitate to reach out.
for sure.
Emily, thank you. Thank you so much for making
Oh,
space to educate us all today. So grateful for you.
yeah, thanks everyone for listening. Appreciate it.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to drop. Please stay on and complete the survey. Your feedback is critically important to us. It's the only way we get better.
Yeah.
But thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank y'all.